Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we drift back through time, more than 2,000 years ago, to a place where myths and reason intertwined, where marble temples gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun, and where poets, warriors, and philosophers shaped the very foundations of the world we live in today. This is the story of ancient Greece. It was a land of contrasts. On one hand, the fierce discipline of Sparta, where boys were taken from their homes to be molded into warriors. On the other, the bustling city of Athens, where ideas about democracy, art, and science began to bloom. Before we begin, if you enjoy these gentle journeys, feel free to like and subscribe, or share your favorite fact in the comments below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, set all that aside. Get comfortable, breathe deeply, and allow your mind to grow quiet. Let's begin. The Greeks believed the gods lived on Mount Olympus. In the imagination of the ancient Greeks, the highest mountain in their land was more than a towering peak. It was the very home of the gods. Mount Olympus, often veiled in clouds and crowned with snow, seemed untouchable, a natural throne that reached into the heavens. Here, they believed, Zeus ruled as king, with Hera, Athena, Apollo, and the other Olympians gathered in a shining palace. From this lofty summit, the gods looked down upon human affairs, sending storms, granting victories, or punishing arrogance. The mountain itself became a symbol of the boundary between mortal life and divine power. For the Greeks, to look upon Olympus was to be reminded of the nearness of the gods and of how fragile human lives seemed in comparison. Even today, the mountain carries an air of mystery, a reminder of how myth and landscape once blended into living belief. Democracy was invented in Athens. The idea that ordinary citizens could share power and guide their own government was born in Athens. In the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, reformers introduced a system where free men, though not women, foreigners, or slaves, could gather to debate and vote on laws. This assembly, known as the Ecclesia, was the heart of Athenian democracy. Leaders were chosen not by birthright, but often by lottery, so that chance, rather than wealth or influence, determined who would serve. The system was far from perfect, yet it was revolutionary in a world ruled mostly by kings. Citizens could speak directly, challenge leaders, and help decide matters of war, peace, and justice. Though centuries have passed and modern democracies are far more inclusive, the Athenians planted the first seed of an idea that still shapes nations today: that power belongs not just to rulers, but to the people themselves. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7. In the militaristic city-state of Sparta, childhood was brief. At just 7 years old, boys were taken from their families and placed into the agoge, a harsh training system designed to forge them into soldiers. From that age onward, they lived under strict discipline, sleeping in communal barracks, eating meager meals, and enduring constant tests of endurance and courage. They were taught to fight, to endure pain without complaint, and to obey without hesitation. Even their speech was trained to be short and sharp, reflecting Sparta's reputation for blunt, laconic wit. For the Spartans, the highest virtue was strength in battle, and the city's survival depended on its warriors. Though this world seems harsh to us now, it created one of the most disciplined military forces the ancient world had ever seen, a society that valued steel and sacrifice above comfort, art, or even family. Bonds. Athens and Sparta were bitter rivals. Although they shared the same language, gods, and festivals, Athens and Sparta were worlds apart. Athens was a city of trade, culture, and democracy, with its harbor bustling with merchants and ships from across the Mediterranean. Sparta, by contrast, was austere, landlocked, and centered entirely on war. These differences bred mistrust and tension, which eventually erupted into the Peloponnesian War, a long, grueling conflict that pitted the two powers against one another. For decades, the Greeks fought among themselves, with shifting alliances and devastating battles. In the end, Sparta emerged victorious, but the war left the entire Greek world weakened, paving the way for new powers to rise. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta is remembered not only as a clash of armies, but also as a clash of ideals between the flourishing of art and philosophy on one side and the relentless pursuit of military strength on the other. The Olympic Games began as a religious festival. The earliest Olympic Games were not simply athletic contests, but sacred rituals in honor of Zeus, the king of the gods. Every 4 years, athletes and spectators traveled to Olympia, a sanctuary filled with temples and altars, where a great festival was held. Before the Games began, sacrifices were offered, and oaths were sworn in the presence of the gods. The competitions themselves were considered a form of worship, acts of devotion that displayed human strength and skill as tributes to divine power. Victors were celebrated not only for their athleticism, but also for pleasing the gods with their performance. The Games became so important that even wars were paused. An Olympic truce ensured safe passage for athletes and spectators. What began as ritual grew into tradition, one that continues today in the form of the modern Olympic Games, carrying echoes of that ancient blend of sport and sacred duty. Athletes competed completely naked. In the ancient Olympic Games and other Greek athletic contests, competitors stripped away their garments and entered the arena nude. To the Greeks, the human body was a symbol of beauty, strength, and divine favor, and athletic competition was a way to honor both body and spirit. The practice was so distinctive that the very word gymnasium comes from gymnos, meaning naked. While it may seem shocking to modern sensibilities, for the Greeks it was natural, a way to celebrate form and freedom without shame. Athletes often rubbed themselves with olive oil to highlight their muscles and protect their skin from the sun. Statues from the period reflect this admiration, showing idealized, powerful forms frozen in stone. The naked athlete became an enduring symbol of Greek culture, proud, fearless, and unashamed in displaying human strength as something both beautiful and sacred. Victors in the Olympics were crowned with olive wreaths. Unlike today's athletes, who may receive medals, sponsorships, and worldwide fame, victors in the ancient Olympic Games were honored with something far simpler: a wreath of wild olive leaves. This crown, cut from a sacred tree near the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, symbolized glory, divine blessing, and eternal remembrance. No gold or silver was needed because the honor itself was priceless. The names of victors were recorded, poets composed songs in their honor, and statues might even be erected in their likeness. To win meant more than personal achievement. It brought prestige to one's city, family, and ancestors. For the Greeks, such victory was a link to immortality, a way of inscribing oneself into the story of the gods and heroes. The humble olive wreath, delicate and fading with time, carried with it the promise of eternal fame in the memory of Greece. Some ancient Greek athletes became international celebrities. Though prizes were modest, fame was immense. The most successful athletes of Greece became renowned across the Mediterranean, celebrated almost like modern sports stars. Victors were showered with gifts by their home cities, free meals, front-row seats at festivals, and sometimes even cash rewards. Poets such as Pindar immortalized their names in verse, ensuring their glory lived on long after the Games ended. Statues of famous athletes were erected in sanctuaries, where travelers could admire them for generations. In some cases, their reputation spread far beyond their homeland, turning them into figures of legend. These champions were admired not just for their strength, but for embodying the ideals of Greek excellence, or arete. In a culture where honor and fame were nearly as important as life itself, the triumph of an athlete was more than sport. It was a pathway to lasting immortality. Women could not compete in the Olympics, but had their own games. The Olympic Games were strictly for men, and women were forbidden not only from competing, but even from attending as spectators. Yet women in ancient Greece were not entirely excluded from athletics. In honor of Hera, queen of the gods, separate games were held, the Heraean Games. These contests featured running races for young women, performed within the same sanctuary of Olympia. Competitors wore short tunics, and the event carried both religious and cultural importance. Although it never achieved the same fame as the men's games, it gave women a sanctioned way to participate in athletic traditions. The existence of the Heraean Games is a reminder that while Greek society often limited women's roles, they still found ways to celebrate strength, endurance, and devotion within their own rituals. A quieter, parallel tradition echoing the great Olympic festival. Spartan women had more rights than most Greek women. While women in Athens were largely confined to the home, Spartan women lived under a very different set of expectations. Because men were constantly away training or at war, women managed estates, controlled property, and oversaw households with considerable independence. They also trained physically, believing that strong women would give birth to strong warriors. Spartan women could inherit land and wealth, a rare privilege in the ancient world, and they were known for speaking their minds boldly. Ancient writers often remarked with shock at how outspoken Spartan women could be, especially compared to their more restricted Athenian counterparts. Though they lived within a society built on war, their relative freedom gave them a striking presence in Greek history. In a world where most women had little voice, Spartan women stood out as powerful figures, respected for their strength, confidence, and essential role in the survival of their city. The Greeks believed in oracles who could see the future. In a world filled with uncertainty, the ancient Greeks turned to oracles for glimpses of what lay ahead. These were sacred individuals, believed to channel the voices of the gods, offering guidance on everything from personal dilemmas to the fates of entire nations. People traveled long distances to consult them, carrying offerings of gold, animals, or fine goods, hoping to receive a divine answer. Oracles held enormous influence, shaping decisions that altered the course of wars, alliances, and dynasties. Yet their words were often mysterious, cloaked in riddles that demanded careful interpretation. To the Greeks, the gods rarely spoke plainly. Truth had to be uncovered slowly, like light filtering through mist. The oracle's presence was a reminder that mortal choices were never entirely human. They were intertwined with divine will, leaving people to wonder whether their lives were guided by chance, choice, or the whispers of the gods. The Oracle of Delphi was considered the voice of Apollo. Of all the oracles in Greece, none was more revered than the Oracle of Delphi. Nestled high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, Delphi was believed to be the very center of the world, the spot marked by Zeus himself when he sent two eagles flying from opposite ends of the earth. Pilgrims gathered in awe, waiting to hear the words of the Pythia, a priestess who entered a trance within Apollo's temple. Seated above a fissure in the earth, she inhaled vapors rising from the ground, and her speech became strange, fragmented, and filled with divine energy. Interpreters shaped her words into prophecies, which were then delivered to the waiting crowd. Kings, generals, and ordinary people alike traveled to Delphi, believing Apollo's wisdom flowed through the Pythia. For centuries, her pronouncements shaped the destiny of Greece, giving Delphi an aura of both mystery and sacred power. The temple of Apollo was said to smell of laurel leaves. At Delphi, the sacred temple dedicated to Apollo, was not only a place of prophecy, but also one of fragrance and ritual. The Pythia, Apollo's oracle, would chew leaves of the laurel tree, sacred to the god, and shake a branch of laurel as she spoke. The temple itself was said to carry the scent of these leaves, a sharp herbal aroma mingling with the smoke of incense and the warmth of burning sacrifices. For the Greeks, the laurel was more than just a plant. It symbolized victory, purity, and divine inspiration. Victors in contests of poetry and sport were crowned with laurel wreaths, echoing this sacred connection. Entering Apollo's temple, pilgrims would have been enveloped in this atmosphere of scent and sound, their senses overwhelmed by the nearness of the divine, as if the very air carried the god's presence. Oracles often spoke in puzzling riddles. The power of the oracle lay not only in her connection to the gods, but in the ambiguity of her words. Rarely did the Pythia offer straightforward answers. Instead, she spoke in riddles, leaving room for interpretation and misinterpretation. A famous example tells of King Croesus of Lydia, who asked whether he should wage war against Persia. The oracle replied that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus went to war, only to realize too late that the empire destroyed was his own. Such riddling pronouncements revealed a deep truth. The gods' knowledge was vast, but humans often understood only fragments. The Greeks learned to listen carefully, to weigh words with patience, and to accept that certainty was rare. In these puzzles lay both wisdom and warning, shaping decisions with layers of meaning that echoed long after the oracle's voice had faded. Great leaders never went to war without consulting the gods. For the Greeks, war was not simply a clash of soldiers, but a sacred endeavor that required divine approval. Before any campaign, leaders sought omens, sacrifices, and oracles to ensure the gods favored their cause. Animals were slaughtered, and priests examined the patterns of their entrails, searching for hidden signs. Birds in flight, the shape of smoke, even the direction of the wind could be read as divine messages. Without such guidance, no general dared lead an army into battle. The practice reflected a worldview where human strength alone was never enough. Victory depended on harmony with the gods. Even mighty leaders like Alexander the Great paused to seek omens before setting out. In these rituals, the Greeks acknowledged their vulnerability, reminding themselves that beyond strategy and steel, there were powers greater than any army, shaping the destinies of men and nations. Greek myths were used to explain natural disasters. When earthquakes shook the land or storms raged across the sea, the Greeks turned to myth to make sense of the chaos. An earthquake might be Poseidon, god of the sea, striking the ground with his trident in anger. A violent storm could be Zeus unleashing his thunderbolts, or the wrath of a goddess displeased by mortal arrogance. Volcanoes were thought to be the fiery breath of imprisoned giants or titans deep beneath the earth. These stories gave shape to the unpredictable, transforming frightening natural events into narratives of gods and heroes. Though the explanations were mythical, they offered comfort, reminding people that disasters were not random but tied to the will of divine beings. By weaving myth into the fabric of nature, the Greeks created a world where every rumble of the earth and flash of lightning carried meaning, binding humanity and the cosmos together. Myths were retold in epic poems for centuries. Long before written texts were common, myths lived in the voices of poets. Through epic poems, tales of gods, heroes, and wars were passed down across generations. These stories were sung or recited at festivals, in marketplaces, or around the hearth, carried by memory and rhythm. The most famous epics, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, were part of a vast oral tradition that preserved Greek culture in vivid, memorable form. Poets like Homer were not seen merely as storytellers, but as inspired vessels, guided by the Muses, divine daughters of memory and creativity. In their verses, listeners could relive the wrath of Achilles, the wanderings of Odysseus, or the creation of the world itself. Epic poetry was more than entertainment. It was a bridge between myth and history, ensuring that the deeds of gods and men would echo through time, woven into the fabric of collective memory. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey shaped all of Western literature. Few works have influenced culture as profoundly as Homer's twin epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad tells of the final year of the Trojan War, filled with rage, glory, and tragedy. The Odyssey follows the long, perilous journey of Odysseus as he struggles to return home. Together, these poems captured not only the drama of myth, but also the complexities of human emotion, love, grief, pride, and the longing for home. For centuries, they were memorized, performed, and studied as the pinnacle of poetic art. Even today, echoes of Homer can be heard in literature, theatre, and film. The themes he explored, the cost of war, the endurance of the human spirit, the power of storytelling, are timeless. For the Greeks, Homer was not just a poet, but a teacher of values, shaping their understanding of heroism, fate, and the meaning of life. The Trojan horse might have been real, or purely a story. One of the most famous tales from the Trojan War is that of the Trojan horse, a massive wooden structure said to have concealed Greek soldiers. According to the story, the Trojans brought it into their city as a supposed gift, only to be ambushed when the Greeks emerged at night, opening the gates for their army. But was it real? Some historians suggest the horse may have been a poetic metaphor, perhaps for a siege engine, or even an earthquake that breached the city walls. Others believe it was simply a tale, crafted to explain the fall of Troy with a dramatic twist. Whether fact or fiction, the image of the Trojan horse became one of history's most enduring symbols of cunning and deception, reminding us that sometimes the greatest victories come not through force, but through strategy, patience, and a clever disguise. Archaeology reveals Troy was a real city. For centuries, many believed the story of Troy was pure legend, no more real than Olympus or Atlantis. But in the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of an ancient city in modern-day Turkey that matched Homer's descriptions. Layers of destruction revealed that the site had been burned and rebuilt many times, suggesting a history of war and resilience. Among the artifacts were weapons, fortifications, and treasures that hinted at a wealthy and powerful city. While scholars debate whether Homer's Trojan War reflects a single historical event or a blend of many, the discovery proved that Troy was not merely a myth. It stood as a real place where people lived, fought, and dreamed. The blurred line between story and history reminds us how myth often preserves a kernel of truth, waiting to be uncovered beneath centuries of dust and imagination. The Greeks believed in hundreds of minor gods and spirits. Beyond the mighty Olympians, Greek belief was crowded with countless lesser gods, spirits, and divine forces. Every river had its spirit, every grove its guardian, every breeze its whispering deity. Nymphs were thought to dwell in forests and springs, watching over the natural world. Household shrines honored the spirits of ancestors and protectors of the home. Even abstract ideas, like victory, love, and strife, were personified as divine beings. To the Greeks, the world was alive with presence, invisible companions walking beside them in daily life. Nothing was truly empty or silent. Everything was infused with sacred potential. This endless host of minor powers reflected how deeply connected the Greeks felt to their environment. seeing divinity not only in the thunder of Zeus or the wisdom of Athena, but also in the rustle of leaves, the trickle of water, and the hidden forces that shaped every corner of existence. Hades was not evil, just the keeper of the underworld. In Greek mythology, Hades is often misunderstood. To later generations, his name became almost synonymous with evil. Yet to the Greeks, he was not a devil but a ruler, stern, impartial, and necessary. As lord of the underworld, Hades presided over the realm of the dead. He did not punish souls, nor reward them. He simply ensured the natural order was upheld. The Greeks feared him, but they also respected him, knowing that death was inevitable for all. Unlike the bright, tempestuous Olympians, Hades was unchanging, a silent figure in a shadowy world. His presence reminded mortals that life was fleeting and that beyond the joys of earth lay a kingdom of stillness. To invoke his name was considered dangerous. So many called him Plato, the giver of wealth, for all riches of the earth, whether crops or precious metals, ultimately came from the depths he ruled. The Greeks thought souls crossed the river Styx after death. According to Greek belief, the journey of the dead began at the river Styx, one of the many rivers that wound through the underworld. Souls of the departed were ferried across by Charon, the grim boatman. To pay him, the dead were buried with a coin placed in their mouth or upon their eyes. Without payment, a soul might wander the banks forever, unable to cross. The river itself was more than a boundary. It was sacred even to the gods. Oaths sworn upon the Styx were unbreakable, binding even the mightiest Olympians to their word. The image of the Styx reflects how the Greeks saw death, a crossing, a threshold, a separation from the world of the living. It gave structure to the mystery of mortality, suggesting that while life ended, it flowed onward into a realm beyond human sight, across dark waters guided by ancient hands. Cerberus, the three-headed dog, guarded the underworld. At the gates of Hades stood one of mythology's most fearsome guardians, Cerberus, the hound with 3 heads, a serpent's tail, and the eyes of a predator. His duty was not to keep the living out, but to ensure the dead did not escape. Souls could enter the underworld easily enough, but leaving was forbidden. Heroes in myth sometimes confronted this monstrous creature. Heracles, in one of his famous labors, captured Cerberus and dragged him into the world above, though only for a short while. Orpheus, the musician, lulled him to sleep with song. Despite his terrifying appearance, Cerberus was loyal, faithful to his role, and an essential part of the cosmic balance. He was the perfect symbol of the boundary between life and death, a creature both awe-inspiring and terrible, who reminded the Greeks that the underworld was a place of permanence, guarded by unyielding strength. Greeks left offerings to appease angry spirits. For the ancient Greeks, the world of the dead was close, and spirits could sometimes wander restlessly among the living. To keep them calm and satisfied, offerings were made, libations of wine or honey, food placed on graves, or small gifts left at crossroads. Festivals such as the Amphisteria, a celebration of Dionysus, included rituals to honor and appease the dead, ensuring they did not linger too long in the realm of the living. These practices reflect a worldview in which the boundary between worlds was fragile, easily crossed. By offering kindness, respect, and remembrance, Greeks believed they could maintain harmony with those who had gone before. It was not only fear but also love that inspired these rituals, the desire to care for ancestors, to keep bonds strong even after death, and to honor the idea that memory itself could give the departed a measure of peace. Dionysus, god of wine, was also the god of theater. Among the Olympian gods, Dionysus was perhaps the most paradoxical. He embodied both joy and madness, freedom and frenzy. Known as the god of wine, he presided over the vine, the cup, and the ecstatic revels of his followers. Yet Dionysus was also the patron of theatre. The great festivals of drama in Athens were dedicated to him, and plays were performed as acts of worship. This connection reveals something profound. For the Greeks, theatre was not mere entertainment, but a sacred space where humans could step outside themselves, just as wine could dissolve ordinary boundaries. Through Dionysus, they explored ecstasy, grief, laughter, and transformation. His presence lingered in both the intoxication of drink and the catharsis of drama. In celebrating him, the Greeks embraced the duality of human experience, joy and sorrow entwined, mortal and divine interwoven, reality and illusion blurred into one. Greek tragedies were considered sacred rituals. In ancient Athens, a tragic play was not just a story, it was a religious act. Performed during festivals in honor of Dionysus, tragedies were offerings to the god as much as entertainment for the audience. The themes often revolved around fate, hubris, and the fragile line between human ambition and divine will. Characters struggled with choices that revealed universal truths about suffering and mortality. The performance itself was part of a communal ritual, where thousands of citizens gathered together to confront shared fears and questions. In this way, tragedy served as a mirror for society, a way to process grief, guilt, and the mysteries of existence. Catharsis, the cleansing release of emotion, was not accidental, but intentional. By participating in tragedy, both actors and audience connected with the sacred, weaving art, ritual, and reflection into a single, transformative experience that lingered long after the play had ended. Audiences could be tens of thousands strong. Greek theatres were vast, open-air structures carved into hillsides, designed to hold astonishing numbers of people. The Theatre of Dionysus in Athens, for example, could seat up to 17,000 spectators. These gatherings were civic as well as religious events, where entire communities came together. Imagine the hum of voices, the anticipation of the crowd, and the collective silence as the first actor stepped onto the stage. The scale was immense, yet the experience was intimate, thanks to the ingenious acoustics of the amphitheater. People from every walk of life sat side by side, sharing in laughter, grief, and wonder. For the Greeks, theatre was not private entertainment, but a communal ritual, binding citizens together in shared reflection. In those moments, tens of thousands of individuals became a single audience, united in emotion and memory, carrying the lessons of the stage back into their own lives. Greek actors wore masks with exaggerated expressions. On the Greek stage, actors transformed themselves with masks, painted faces of joy, sorrow, rage, or comedy. These masks were not simply decorations, they amplified expression, ensuring even the spectators in the farthest rows could read the emotions of the character. They also carried symbolic weight, representing archetypes larger than life. By donning a mask, an actor stepped beyond the personal self, becoming a vessel for gods, heroes, or universal human roles. The exaggerated features helped project both voice and feeling, resonating across vast amphitheaters. In a culture where drama was sacred ritual, the mask became a bridge between mortal and divine, actor and audience, the individual and the collective. To watch a masked performance was to witness not just a story, but a transformation, where identity dissolved and the timeless truths of human existence were laid bare for all to see. Theatres were engineered for perfect acoustics. Greek theatres, built into natural slopes, displayed astonishing architectural brilliance. The semicircular arrangement of stone seats was not just aesthetically pleasing, but acoustically perfect. Even a whisper on stage could be heard by spectators seated hundreds of feet away. The shape funneled sound upward, while the materials reflected and amplified voices. Modern experiments have confirmed the precision of this design, leaving scholars amazed at the ingenuity of ancient engineers. These spaces were more than functional. They embodied harmony between art, nature, and human craft. Watching a play in such a theatre must have felt like entering a sacred soundscape, where every word carried weight and silence itself became profound. The fact that these structures still stand and still carry voices across their ancient stones is a testament to the Greeks' mastery of architecture and to their deep understanding of how place and performance are inseparable. Some plays were so powerful that audiences wept openly. Greek theatre was not light amusement, it was an emotional storm that swept over its audience. In tragedies by playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides, characters confronted unbearable loss, betrayal, or the merciless grip of fate. Thousands sat together in vast amphitheaters, and when the story reached its darkest moments, it was not unusual for the audience to cry openly. The Greeks believed this release of emotion, called catharsis, was essential. By sharing in the grief of fictional heroes, people cleansed their own hearts of sorrow, fear, and pity. Imagine the hush of thousands falling into tears as Oedipus blinded himself, or as Medea's terrible choices unfolded on stage. These communal experiences bound the citizens together in shared reflection, reminding them that tragedy was not only personal but universal, and that in suffering, even imagined suffering, there was a strange kind of healing. Comedy was invented by the Greeks to mock politicians. Alongside tragedy, the Greeks created another genre, comedy, sharp, playful, and biting. In Athens, playwrights like Aristophanes wrote comedies that lampooned leaders, mocked policies, and poked fun at the absurdities of everyday life. Politicians, generals, and even the gods themselves were targets of satire. Imagine thousands of Athenians roaring with laughter as familiar figures were caricatured on stage, their flaws exaggerated for comic effect. Comedy was not only entertainment but also social commentary, a way for citizens to reflect on the follies of their leaders and themselves. At times it was bold enough to sway public opinion, cleverly disguising criticism beneath humor. To laugh together at shared problems was a powerful act, reminding the Greeks that humor could illuminate truth just as much as tragedy did. The invention of political comedy endures even today in plays, television, and satire that challenge authority with wit. Socrates taught by asking endless questions. Socrates, one of Athens' most famous philosophers, never wrote a single book. Instead, he wandered the city, engaging anyone willing to listen in conversation. His method was simple but revolutionary. He asked questions. Again and again he challenged assumptions, forcing his companions to think more deeply about justice, virtue, courage, and truth. By questioning, he revealed contradictions in their beliefs, leaving them unsettled yet wiser. To some, he was a nuisance to others, a guide toward clarity. His relentless pursuit of truth ultimately led to his trial, accused of corrupting the youth and defying the gods. When sentenced to death, he calmly drank poison hemlock, becoming a martyr for philosophy itself. Socrates' method, the endless questioning of ideas, lives on in classrooms and debates today, reminding us that wisdom begins not in certainty, but in the courage to ask, again and again, what do we truly know? Plato founded the world's first university. Socrates' most famous student, Plato, carried his teacher's spirit forward. Around 387 BCE, he founded the Academy in Athens, a place where students could gather to discuss philosophy, mathematics, politics, and science. This institution is often called the world's first true university, a community dedicated to learning for its own sake. At the Academy, questions of justice, the nature of reality, and the structure of the ideal state were debated passionately. Plato himself wrote dialogues, using characters like Socrates to explore profound ideas. His influence spread far beyond Greece, shaping medieval thought, Renaissance art, and modern philosophy. The academy endured for centuries, until it was finally closed by a Roman emperor who feared its ideas. Yet its legacy continues. Every academy, every school of higher learning carries a trace of Plato's vision, that knowledge is a treasure best pursued together through dialogue and reflection. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. Plato's student, Aristotle, became one of the greatest thinkers of all time, and his influence extended far beyond philosophy. When Philip II of Macedon sought a tutor for his young son, Alexander, he chose Aristotle. Under his guidance, Alexander was exposed to a vast range of subjects: logic, ethics, politics, science, and poetry. Aristotle instilled in him a deep curiosity and an appreciation for Greek culture. Some say this education helped shape Alexander into a leader who valued not only conquest but also knowledge and culture. As Alexander marched across Asia, he carried with him the spirit of Greek learning, spreading it far beyond its homeland. The relationship between tutor and pupil is one of history's most remarkable pairings: the philosopher who sought truth in all things, and the king who sought to rule the world. Their connection ensured that wisdom and power became intertwined in unexpected ways. The Greeks coined the term philosophy, love of wisdom. The word philosophy itself comes from the Greeks, philo meaning love, and sophia meaning wisdom. To them, philosophy was not an abstract discipline, but a way of life, the pursuit of truth, meaning, and understanding in every aspect of existence. Philosophers asked questions about the nature of the cosmos, the purpose of life, and the best way to live. They did not see wisdom as something one possessed, but as something one continually sought through dialogue, reflection, and learning. This love of wisdom became a guiding principle, inspiring generations of thinkers across the world. Even today, the word reminds us of the Greek spirit: restless, questioning, never satisfied with easy answers. For the Greeks, to love wisdom was to be fully human, to reach beyond mere survival, to wonder at the stars, and to search endlessly for truth in both the world and within oneself. Greek thinkers tried to understand the cosmos without myths. Although myths filled their culture, some Greek thinkers began to search for explanations that did not rely on gods or legends. These early philosophers, often called natural philosophers, asked daring questions. What is the universe made of? Why do stars move? What causes change? Thinkers like Thales suggested that water was the underlying substance of all things. Anaximander proposed that the Earth floated in space. Democritus imagined that everything was composed of tiny, indivisible particles, atoms, an idea astonishingly close to modern science. These attempts were bold, breaking from tradition and seeking natural laws instead of divine intervention. Though their methods were primitive by today's standards, they represented a radical shift, a belief that reason and observation could uncover the mysteries of the cosmos. In these first steps, the Greeks planted seeds that would one day grow into science itself. Pythagoras believed numbers had mystical powers. Most students know Pythagoras for his famous theorem about right triangles, but to him and his followers, numbers were more than mathematics, they were sacred. Pythagoras believed that numbers governed the harmony of the universe. Music, for example, could be explained through ratios, and the movement of celestial bodies was thought to form a harmony of the spheres. His secretive school treated mathematics almost as a religion, with rules, rituals, and mysteries. Numbers were not only tools, but living principles, shaping everything from geometry to the soul. Though some of his ideas sound strange to us, his belief in hidden order was profoundly influential. To see numbers as the language of reality was a leap of imagination that echoed through centuries. Even today, when we marvel at the beauty of equations or the patterns of nature, we walk in the footsteps of Pythagoras' mystical vision. Hippocrates is called the father of medicine. In a world where illness was often blamed on angry gods or evil spirits, Hippocrates of Kos offered a new perspective. He believed that disease had natural causes and could be treated with careful observation, diet, and remedies drawn from nature. He emphasized the importance of examining patients closely, keeping records, and treating the whole person rather than just the symptoms. His approach laid the foundation for medicine as a rational science. To this day, he is remembered as the father of medicine. Though limited by the knowledge of his time, his insistence that illness was not a curse but a condition to be studied was revolutionary. Hippocrates gave humanity the idea that healing belonged not to the whims of the gods, but to human skill, patience, and compassion. In this shift, he transformed suffering into a field where reason could bring relief. The Hippocratic Oath still influences doctors today. Perhaps Hippocrates' most enduring legacy is the Hippocratic Oath, a pledge that physicians take to uphold ethical standards in their practice. The original oath, written in ancient Greece, bound doctors to use their knowledge for healing, to avoid harm, and to respect the sacred trust between doctor and patient. While the wording has changed over the centuries, the essence remains. Medicine is not merely a skill, but a moral responsibility. Even today, medical graduates around the world recite modern versions of the oath, linking them to a tradition over 2,000 years old. The idea that doctors must place the well-being of their patients above all else was radical in its time, and it continues to shape healthcare. Through this oath, the voice of ancient Greece still whispers into the present, reminding us that compassion and integrity are as vital to healing as knowledge itself. Greek doctors prescribed honey, vinegar, and wine as medicine. Ancient Greek medicine often blended observation with remedies drawn from everyday life. Honey was prized for its soothing and antibacterial properties, used to treat wounds and sore throats. Vinegar was believed to cleanse and balance the body, sometimes mixed with water as a tonic. Wine, beyond its role in feasts, was used as an antiseptic, poured into wounds to prevent infection. Herbs like garlic, mint, and thyme were also prescribed for various ailments. While many of these treatments might seem simple, modern science confirms that honey and wine do indeed carry medicinal qualities. What set Greek doctors apart was their effort to catalogue these remedies carefully, connecting symptoms to treatments. They sought patterns, testing what worked rather than relying solely on superstition. In their hands, the kitchen and the clinic often overlapped, showing how healing began with both the wisdom of tradition and the curiosity of observation. Ancient Greek scientists studied the stars. The night sky fascinated the Greeks, who looked upward not only for myth but for knowledge. Astronomers like Hipparchus and Ptolemy charted the stars, recording their movements with precision. They noticed patterns, constellations that told stories of gods and heroes, but also measured the rising and setting of stars to track time and seasons. Farmers depended on these observations to know when to plant and harvest. Sailors steered their ships by the stars, navigating the vast Mediterranean. For some thinkers, the heavens held deeper secrets. Questions about the nature of the cosmos, the shape of the earth, and the possibility of worlds beyond our own. Their blend of myth, observation, and mathematics laid the foundation for astronomy. To the Greeks, the stars were both divine symbols and natural phenomena, shimmering guides that bridged human imagination and the order of the universe. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with shadows. Around 240 BCE, Eratosthenes, the librarian of Alexandria, made an astonishing discovery. By comparing the lengths of shadows in two cities, Syene and Alexandria, he realized that the earth must be curved. At noon on the summer solstice in Syene, the sun shone directly overhead, casting no shadow. Yet in Alexandria, a stick still cast a shadow at the same time. Measuring the angle and knowing the distance between the cities, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy, within a few hundred miles of the true figure. Without satellites, telescopes, or global maps, he used only simple tools: sticks, shadows, and geometry. His insight was one of the greatest intellectual leaps of the ancient world, proving that reason and observation could reveal the shape of the planet itself. For the Greeks, it was evident that human minds could grasp even the vastness of the earth. Aristarchus suggested the earth orbits the sun. Long before Copernicus, a Greek thinker named Aristarchus of Samos proposed a radical idea: the earth orbits the sun. In his view, the sun, not the earth, was at the center of the cosmos. He even suggested that the stars were distant suns, unimaginably far away. Though his theory was largely dismissed by his contemporaries, who favored a geocentric model, Aristarchus glimpsed a truth that would not be widely accepted for nearly 2 millennia. His vision shows the daring of Greek thought, the willingness to challenge common sense and tradition in pursuit of explanation. To place the earth in motion, spinning through the heavens, was a leap of the imagination almost too bold for his time. Yet in planting this idea, Aristarchus proved that even in the ancient world, the seeds of modern astronomy were already being sown under the quiet watch of the stars. Archimedes designed deadly war machines. Archimedes, the brilliant inventor from Syracuse, is often remembered for his discoveries in mathematics and physics, but he was also a master of engineering in war. When his city faced attack by the Romans, he devised ingenious machines to defend it. Among them were giant catapults capable of hurling massive stones, cranes that lifted and capsized enemy ships, and devices that could rain projectiles upon advancing troops. Legends even tell of heat rays, mirrors concentrating sunlight to set ships ablaze, though historians debate this. Whatever the truth, Archimedes' defenses were so effective that Roman soldiers were said to fear approaching the walls of Syracuse. His inventions demonstrated how knowledge could be turned to destruction as easily as to peace. In Archimedes, the Greeks saw the union of science, creativity, and power, a mind capable of reshaping the battlefield as surely as the laboratory. He also invented the Archimedes screw to move water. Not all of Archimedes' genius was devoted to war. He also created devices that improved everyday life, such as the Archimedes screw. This simple yet elegant machine consisted of a spiral tube within a cylinder, which, when turned, lifted water upward. Farmers used it to irrigate their fields, while engineers drained ships and marshes. The design was so effective that it is still used today in some parts of the world. What made it remarkable was not only its practicality, but also its reflection of Archimedes' approach, combining deep understanding with simple, enduring solutions. The Archimedes screw became a symbol of how human ingenuity could harness natural forces, turning effort into efficiency. It was a reminder that science need not always strive for grandeur. Sometimes, the most lasting inventions are those that make life just a little easier, spinning quietly like a spiral lifting water toward the light. Greek mathematicians loved elegant proofs. For Greek mathematicians, solving a problem was not enough. The beauty lay in the proof. They sought clarity, order, and elegance, turning mathematics into a kind of art. Euclid's Elements, a collection of geometric proofs, became one of the most influential books in history, shaping mathematics for over 2,000 years. Each proof unfolded step by step, logical and inevitable, like a poem of reason. To the Greeks, numbers and shapes revealed not only practical truths but eternal ones, glimpses of a hidden harmony in the universe. The discipline of reasoning from first principles, building knowledge brick by brick, reflected their philosophical spirit. Mathematics was not merely calculation but a pathway to understanding, a bridge between human thought and cosmic order. In their search for elegance, Greek mathematicians left behind a legacy that still underpinned science, engineering, and the very logic of thought itself. Geometry was considered sacred knowledge. Among the Greeks, geometry was more than lines and shapes. It was a window into the divine structure of reality. Circles, triangles, and proportions were seen as symbols of cosmic harmony, reflecting truths that transcended the material world. Pythagoreans believed that geometry revealed the hidden order of the universe, linking mathematics to music, art, and even morality. Temples and theatres were designed with geometric precision, embodying balance and proportion as sacred principles. To study geometry was to approach wisdom, a way of aligning the human mind with the eternal. Euclid's axioms became almost scripture, guiding generations in the art of pure thought. The Greeks found beauty not just in physical forms, but in the invisible laws that shaped them. For them, geometry was proof that beneath the changing surface of the world lay patterns as timeless as the gods themselves. Greek coins spread across the Mediterranean. As Greek city-states grew wealthy through trade, they minted coins that soon spread across the Mediterranean world. Each city struck its own currency, decorated with symbols of local pride: owls for Athens, turtles for Aegina, Pegasus for Corinth. These coins carried more than monetary value. They were miniature works of art, spreading Greek culture and identity wherever they traveled. Merchants carried them across seas, and soldiers spent them in distant lands, making Greek imagery familiar far beyond its borders. Coins also reflected power. The more widely a city's currency was accepted, the greater its influence. In this way, tiny discs of silver and gold became tools of both economy and culture, linking distant peoples through trade and symbol. To hold a Greek coin was to hold a piece of a city's story, stamped in metal, passed from hand to hand across centuries. Some coins showed famous mythical monsters. Greek coins were not limited to gods and symbols. Some bore images of legendary creatures. Gorgons, with their terrifying gaze, were stamped onto shields and coins to ward off evil. The winged horse Pegasus soared across Corinthian coins, a mark of the city's power and mythic heritage. Lions, griffins, and sea monsters appeared too, blending artistry with storytelling. These designs were not only decorative but protective, carrying mythical strength into daily life. A merchant exchanging coins might feel as though he held a talisman, a small piece of divine or magical power. In this way, coins became more than currency. They were amulets, artworks, and storytellers, spreading myths alongside commerce. The imagery ensured that even in ordinary transactions, the Greeks were reminded of their legends, their gods, and the strange, wondrous creatures that filled the imagination of their world. Sparta had no city walls, only warriors. Unlike most ancient cities, which fortified themselves with stone walls, Sparta stood unguarded. The Spartans believed their soldiers were their walls, their discipline the strongest defense. To them, reliance on fortifications showed weakness. True security came from the bravery of its warriors. This pride was so deep that it became part of their identity, a declaration that no barrier of stone could compare to the shield wall of a Spartan phalanx. Foreign visitors marveled at the audacity, a city defended not by masonry, but by men. This confidence was not without foundation. For centuries, Sparta's military dominance made it nearly untouchable. The absence of walls became a symbol of strength and fearlessness, a reminder that Sparta trusted not in structures, but in its people, warriors who themselves stood as the living, breathing fortification of their homeland. Spartan soldiers slept outdoors with minimal shelter. The life of the Spartan soldier was stripped of luxury. From boyhood, they were trained to endure discomfort, hunger, and fatigue. Even as adults, Spartan warriors rarely enjoyed the comforts of home, spending much of their lives in barracks or out in the field. They slept on reeds or straw, often under open skies, with little more than cloaks for warmth. This practice hardened them, instilling resilience and an indifference to hardship. To Spartans, comfort was a distraction, softness a danger. By denying themselves ease, they believed they sharpened their strength and courage. This austere lifestyle contrasted sharply with the lives of Athenians who valued art, leisure, and refinement. For Sparta, simplicity and discipline were virtues. A soldier who could march without rest, fight without complaint, and endure without luxury embodied the city's ideals, a living symbol of Spartan resolve and devotion to the art of war. Spartans were trained to speak briefly and sharply. In Sparta, words were treated like weapons, precise, sharp, and economical. From a young age, Spartans were taught not to waste breath on long speeches, but to speak with biting brevity. This style became so distinctive that it gave rise to the term laconic, derived from Laconia, the region where Sparta was located. A laconic reply was not only short but cutting, often carrying wit or authority. When an enemy threatened to overwhelm Sparta, the reply was simple: if. When asked why their swords were so short, Spartans answered, "So we may reach our enemies sooner." These remarks, terse yet powerful, reflected the Spartan character, practical, disciplined, and unyielding. In a culture where deeds mattered more than words, brevity was an art form. Every phrase was honed like a blade, designed to strike directly to the heart of the matter, without flourish or delay. The word laconic comes from Sparta's region. The word laconic has survived centuries, still used today to describe speech that is concise and pointed. Its origin lies in Laconia, the region of Greece dominated by Sparta. The Spartans' habit of answering in few words impressed and intimidated outsiders. Stories of their sharp replies spread across the ancient world, turning their style into legend. To the Spartans, economy of speech mirrored economy of life. No excess, no waste, only what was necessary. Their culture valued silence, endurance, and action over rhetoric. Ironically, their brevity has echoed far longer than many elaborate speeches of the age. The very word reminds us of their distinctive approach to life and language. When we describe something as laconic today, we invoke the memory of a society that believed clarity and strength were best expressed in the fewest possible words, leaving silence to speak the rest. Athens became wealthy through trade and silver mines. While Sparta built power through war, Athens flourished through trade and resources. Its location near the sea gave it access to vast trade networks, linking it to Egypt, Asia Minor, and beyond. Ships crowded its harbors, carrying pottery, olive oil, and wine in exchange for grain, timber, and luxury goods. Yet Athens' greatest source of wealth lay beneath its soil, the silver mines of Laurion. These mines provided the revenue that funded Athens' navy, its temples, and its democratic institutions. The teeming Parthenon itself was paid for, in part, by silver from deep underground. This wealth also made Athens a cultural beacon, attracting artists, philosophers, and craftsmen. Prosperity was the foundation of its golden age, allowing it to outshine rivals in art and politics. Where Sparta relied on discipline, Athens relied on wealth. Two very different paths to prominence in the ancient Greek world. The Parthenon was a temple covered in bright paint. Today, the Parthenon on the Acropolis of Athens stands in pale marble, its columns glowing white in the sun. But in its prime, it was anything but plain. The temple to Athena was once adorned with vivid colors, reds, blues, and golds painted across friezes and statues. The sculptures glistened with detail, the carved figures brought to life with paint and gilding. To ancient eyes, the Parthenon was dazzling, its brilliance reflecting both devotion and power. The misconception of white marble temples comes from centuries of weathering and from later admiration of their worn elegance. Yet the Greeks themselves loved color, and their temples were vibrant expressions of artistry. To walk into the Parthenon in its full glory would have been to step into a world of light, story, and sacred beauty, where stone was transformed into a living canvas honoring the goddess of wisdom. Most Greek temples were brilliantly colored, not white. The stark white ruins we see today give a misleading impression of ancient Greece. In truth, most temples were richly painted, their columns, pediments, and carvings alive with bold hues. Red and blue dominated, while details were picked out in gold and green. The effect was striking, almost theatrical, turning stone into something vivid and divine. Paint accentuated the stories carved into stone, ensuring figures of gods, heroes, and monsters stood out even from a distance. This love of color extended to statues and public buildings, creating cities that were far more vibrant than the weathered remains suggest. Over centuries, the paint faded and disappeared, leaving only bare marble behind. The rediscovery of pigments on ancient ruins has reshaped our understanding, reminding us that Greek architecture was not minimalist but exuberant, a celebration of color and form that dazzled the eye. Ancient world. Greek sculptures were painted too. Much like temples, Greek statues were originally covered in bright paint, a practice called polychromy. Eyes were outlined, hair tinted, garments painted in reds, blues, and greens. Gold leaf often shimmered across details, giving a divine radiance to figures of gods and heroes. This painted life made statues appear almost real, closer to living presences than cold stone. For centuries, people assumed Greek sculpture was pure white, a vision that influenced Renaissance and neoclassical art. Yet traces of pigment discovered under microscopes have revealed the truth. The Greeks loved vivid color. Imagine walking through a temple lined with statues that glowed with painted detail, each figure looking alive, expressive, and otherworldly. Far from austere, Greek art was bold and luminous, reminding viewers that the divine world was full of life, energy, and brilliance, not merely frozen in the stillness of pale marble. Statues of gods were believed to hold their presence. For the Greeks, statues were not just representations, but vessels. A carefully crafted figure of Zeus, Athena, or Apollo could serve as a dwelling place for the god's spirit. Temples housed these images at their center, and worshippers approached them with awe, offerings, and prayers. Rituals often included dressing the statues, adorning them with garlands, or bathing them in sacred water. To harm a statue was considered sacrilege, not against stone, but against the god within. These statues were more than art. They were portals, connecting mortals to the divine. In their presence, people felt the nearness of powers far greater than themselves. Even today, fragments of these figures carry a strange aura, reminding us that they were once alive with belief, treated not as mere creations of human hands, but as companions of the sacred world they represented. Some statues were so huge they towered over cities. Greek sculptors were not content with modest forms. Some created works so immense they became wonders of the world. The Colossus of Rhodes, a bronze statue of the sun god Helios, was said to stand over 100 feet tall, straddling the harbor and welcoming ships with its brilliance. In Olympia, the statue of Zeus, crafted by Phidias, sat upon a throne, its gilded figure so enormous that it nearly brushed the ceiling of its temple. These monumental creations were feats of both engineering and devotion, inspiring awe in all who saw them. Though time and disaster have destroyed them, their memory lingers in descriptions that suggest their overwhelming presence. Such statues were more than art. They were symbols of civic pride and divine favor, towering reminders that the gods were not only honored, but made visible on a scale that shook the imagination. The Colossus of Rhodes was one of the 7 wonders. On the island of Rhodes, the people built a statue so vast it became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Known as the Colossus, it was a bronze figure of the sun god Helios, constructed to celebrate Rhodes' survival against a siege. The statue stood over 100 feet tall, towering above the harbor. Though later legends claimed ships sailed beneath its legs, in reality, it likely stood to one side, gazing over the sea. For decades, travelers marveled at its size and craftsmanship, until an earthquake brought it crashing down. Even in ruins, its remains inspired awe, with massive fragments lying scattered across the ground. The Colossus embodied the ambition of the Greeks to honor their gods with works so immense they rivaled nature itself, monuments not only to faith, but to the extraordinary reach of human imagination and skill. The statue of Zeus at Olympia was covered in gold. At Olympia, in the temple dedicated to Zeus, stood one of the greatest masterpieces of Greek art. Crafted by the sculptor Phidias, the statue of Zeus was so immense that his head nearly touched the temple's ceiling. He sat upon a grand throne, his figure inlaid with ivory for skin and adorned with plates of gleaming gold. In his hand he held a figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, as if presenting triumph itself. Worshippers who entered the temple described being overwhelmed, struck silent by the sight. The statue was not only a marvel of scale and beauty, but also a symbol of divine majesty. Sadly, it was eventually lost, likely destroyed by fire. Yet its memory endures, reminding us how the Greeks sought to make the presence of their gods visible, to create art so powerful that it transported mortals into the realm of the divine. Greek ships were fast, sleek, and deadly in naval battles. Surrounded by seas, the Greeks became master sailors, crafting ships designed for both trade and war. Their warships were narrow, swift, and powered by banks of rowers who moved in perfect rhythm, their oars cutting through the water like a heartbeat. Speed was everything. In battle, maneuvering could mean victory or destruction. These ships were built light enough to dart across waves, yet sturdy enough to withstand ramming. With their pointed prows, they could slice into the hulls of enemy vessels, splintering wood and sending ships sinking into the depths. Commanders trained their crews like dancers, drilling them until their movements were perfectly synchronized. At sea, the Greeks found both opportunity and danger. Their ships carried goods, culture, and soldiers across the Mediterranean, extending their reach and influence. Each sleek vessel was more than wood and sail. It was the lifeline of a civilization bound to the sea. The trireme could ram enemy ships to pieces. The most famous of Greek warships was the trireme, a sleek vessel with 3 rows of oars on each side. Manned by up to 200 rowers, it was a marvel of speed and precision. The trireme's most deadly feature was its bronze-covered prow, designed to strike enemy ships. In battle, these warships darted across the waves, lining up their rams with devastating accuracy. A single well-placed strike could shatter timbers, flooding a vessel and sending it under. Battles became choreographed chaos, with ships weaving, colliding, and splintering across the sea. Rowers worked tirelessly below deck, while soldiers stood ready above, waiting to board. The trireme made Athens' navy the most powerful in Greece, ensuring dominance in both trade and warfare. It was a weapon that turned the sea into a battlefield, where victory belonged not to sheer size, but to speed, coordination, and deadly precision. Sea travel was dangerous, but essential to Greek life. For the Greeks, the sea was both a gift and a peril. Their mountainous homeland made farming difficult, so they relied on ships to connect them to the wider world. Yet every voyage carried risk. Storms could rise suddenly, battering fragile wooden vessels. Pirates lurked along busy trade routes, ready to ambush. Navigation relied on the stars and landmarks, leaving sailors vulnerable when skies clouded. Despite these dangers, the sea was essential. It carried olive oil, wine, and pottery across the Mediterranean and brought back grain, timber, and precious metals. The Greeks became expert seafarers, their lives tied to the rhythms of wind and wave. To them, Poseidon was both protector and destroyer, a god who could calm seas or smash ships at will. Each journey was an act of faith, a reminder that survival depended on courage, skill, and the mercy of the waters. Greeks founded colonies from Spain to the Black Sea. The Greek world was never limited to its mainland. Beginning in the 8th century BCE, city-states sent settlers far beyond their borders, establishing colonies across the Mediterranean and Black Sea. From the coast of Spain to the shores of modern-day Ukraine, Greek culture spread like a web of shining outposts. These colonies brought Greek language, religion, and art to distant lands, while also absorbing influences from the peoples they encountered. They became centers of trade, connecting local resources to Greek markets. Cities like Massalia, modern Marseille, and Byzantium, later Constantinople, began as Greek foundations. Colonization reflected both necessity and ambition, the need for farmland and the desire for power. Through these settlements, Greece extended far beyond its small peninsula, creating a world where the echoes of Homer and the shadow of Athena could be found across seas, mountains, and distant foreign shores. Sicily was once home to mighty Greek cities. The island of Sicily, far from mainland Greece, became one of the richest and most contested Greek regions. Colonists founded cities such as Syracuse, Agrigentum, and Gela, which flourished thanks to fertile land and strategic harbors. These cities grew wealthy and powerful, often rivaling Greece itself in size and influence. Syracuse, in particular, became famous for its culture and its leaders, including the brilliant inventor Archimedes. Yet Sicily's wealth also drew enemies. Carthaginians and Romans battled the Greeks for control of the island, making it a crossroads of Mediterranean power. For centuries, Sicily's Greek cities stood as shining examples of how far Hellenic culture had spread. Even today, ruins of temples and theaters lie scattered across the island, reminders that Sicily was once not just Italian or Roman, but deeply, profoundly Greek, a place where myths, language, and traditions thrived far from their original homeland. The Greeks brought olives and grapes wherever they went. Wherever Greeks settled, two crops followed, the olive and the grape. Olives provided oil used in cooking, lamps, and even skincare. Grapes became wine, a drink at the heart of Greek culture. These plants were more than food, they were symbols of identity, gifts of the gods. Athena herself was said to have given the olive tree to Athens, while Dionysus embodied the vine and its intoxicating fruit. Colonists carried cuttings and seeds to new lands, planting groves and vineyards that transformed local economies. The Mediterranean climate welcomed these crops, turning barren soil into flourishing orchards and fields. Through olives and grapes, Greek culture rooted itself in foreign soil, ensuring that every colony carried a taste of home. To walk through a grove of olive trees in Sicily or Spain was, in a sense, to walk in Greece. Wherever its people had traveled, their gods and traditions grew too. Olive oil was used for cooking, light, and cleaning the skin. Few substances were as vital to Greek life as olive oil. In kitchens, it flavored meals and preserved foods. In homes, it filled lamps, casting soft light across evenings. Athletes rubbed it onto their bodies before exercise, then scraped it away afterward, cleansing sweat and dust from their skin. Olive oil was also offered in rituals, poured onto altars as a gift for the gods. It became an export commodity, stored in great clay amphorae and shipped across the seas. To the Greeks, the olive tree was sacred, its oil a symbol of both prosperity and purity. Its uses blended the practical with the spiritual, making it not just a food but a substance of daily ritual. When Greeks carried olives to their colonies, they carried a piece of their soul, ensuring that wherever they lived, the glow of oil lamps and the taste of its fruit would remind them of home. Wine was always mixed with water. Drinking it straight was barbaric. Wine flowed through Greek culture, yet it was never consumed in the way we imagine today. To drink wine unmixed, strong and undiluted, was considered uncivilized, something only barbarians or the reckless would do. Instead, wine was always diluted with water at symposia and feasts. Ratios varied, but the practice reflected the Greek value of moderation. Wine was meant to inspire conversation, creativity, and joy, not drunkenness. At gatherings, participants reclined, shared poetry, debated philosophy, and drank together from mixing bowls, the diluted wine a symbol of harmony between excess and restraint. To the Greeks, balance was divine, and the act of tempering wine mirrored the tempering of the soul. The ritual of mixing wine and water was more than custom. It was philosophy poured into a cup, reminding all who drank that wisdom was found not in extremes, but in moderation. Greek banquets were called symposia. The Greeks gave a special name to their banquets, the symposium, meaning drinking together. These gatherings were not just about food and wine, but about conversation, music, and shared experience. After a meal, guests reclined on couches while servants poured wine mixed carefully with water. The symposium was a stage for storytelling, poetry, and debate, where ideas flowed as freely as the wine. Games were played, songs were sung, and friendships were strengthened. At times, serious discussions unfolded about politics, philosophy, or love, while at others, laughter and merriment carried the night. The symposium reflected Greek values: moderation, companionship, and the blending of pleasure with thought. To join one was to step into a ritual where body and mind were nourished together, where the act of drinking became an art, and where the company of others turned an ordinary evening into something memorable and almost sacred. Guests reclined on couches and drank all night. At a symposium, guests did not sit at tables as we might expect. Instead, they reclined on couches arranged around the room, leaning on cushions as servants brought them wine and food. This posture symbolized leisure, luxury, and intimacy, creating a relaxed atmosphere where conversation could flow. Cups of wine were passed, often accompanied by snacks, fruits, and delicacies. The night stretched on, filled with toasts, laughter, and sometimes heated debates. To drink together was to bond, to share both joy and vulnerability. The setting encouraged openness, as reclining blurred the formality of standing or sitting. These gatherings could last until dawn, leaving participants weary, but filled with stories and memories. Reclining on couches surrounded by candlelight and music, the Greeks created a timeless image of fellowship, a way of reminding themselves that life's greatest pleasures came not from solitude, but from sharing in dath, the company of others. Symposia often featured philosophical debates. Wine fueled not only merriment, but also thought. At symposia, it was common for discussions to turn toward philosophy, with guests debating questions of love, virtue, justice, and the meaning of life. Plato's famous work, The Symposium, takes place at such a gathering, where brilliant minds like Socrates explored the nature of love. These conversations were as intoxicating as the wine itself, weaving deep perfection with spirited exchange. The act of mixing wine with water symbolized balance, and so too did these debates, balancing pleasure with wisdom, entertainment with inquiry. For the Greeks, truth was not found in solitude alone, but in dialogue, in the clash and mingling of ideas. Symposia offered a space where citizens could think freely, testing their thoughts against others while still enjoying the warmth of friendship. In this blend of festivity and philosophy, the symposium became a cradle of ideas that shaped the world. Music and poetry were as important as wine. A symposium without music would have felt incomplete. Musicians, often hired for the night, played lyres, flutes, and other instruments, filling the air with melody. Poets recited verses, sometimes their own, sometimes classics known to all. Guests themselves might sing or improvise poetry, competing to charm the room. Music and poetry were not seen as mere diversions. They were integral to the experience, lifting spirits, softening hearts, and sparking imagination. The rhythms matched the rise and fall of conversation, weaving entertainment with reflection. For the Greeks, music was a divine gift, connected to harmony in both the cosmos and the soul. Poetry, meanwhile, carried stories of gods, heroes, and love, reminding listeners of their place in a larger world of myth and memory. Together, music and poetry elevated the symposium into something more than a feast, a celebration of art, intellect, and the shared human voice. The Greeks invented many musical instruments. Ancient Greece was alive with sound, and many instruments that shaped Western music traced their origins there. The lyre, with its delicate strings, accompanied poetry and song. The aulos, a reed instrument resembling a flute, produced bold, haunting tones, often played in pairs. Percussion instruments like drums and cymbals added rhythm to festivals and dances. Even instruments resembling bagpipes were known. Each had its own place, some suited to solemn rituals, others to revelry. Music was more than entertainment. It was woven into worship, education, and daily life. Children were taught to play instruments as part of their schooling, linking music to discipline and virtue. The Greeks believed that music shaped character, tuning the soul much as an instrument is tuned. By inventing and refining these tools of melody, they gave voice to joy, grief, worship, and wonder, leaving echoes that still resonate in the music we play today. Lyres, flutes, and drums filled the banquet halls. At symposia and festivals, music was everywhere. The soft strumming of lyres created gentle backgrounds for conversation, while flutes filled the room with piercing, playful notes. Drums and cymbals added rhythm, turning gatherings into dances. Together, these sounds wove an atmosphere that was both intimate and celebratory. The music could inspire reflection or laughter, heighten the mood, or soothe weariness. For the Greeks, instruments were not simply entertainment, but voices of the divine. Apollo was god of the lyre, while Dionysus was often linked with the wild, pulsing sounds of flutes and drums. Music created a bridge between human and divine joy, lifting ordinary evenings into something timeless. When we imagine a Greek banquet, we should not picture silence or mere talk, but a vibrant tapestry of sound, where every note carried meaning and every guest was drawn into harmony with one another. Greek pottery was painted with stories of gods and heroes. Everyday objects in Greece often carried extraordinary beauty. Pottery, used for storage, cooking, or drinking, was painted with intricate designs that told stories of gods, heroes, and daily life. Scenes from myths, Heracles wrestling lions, Achilles in battle, Dionysus among revelers, appeared alongside depictions of farmers, athletes, and families. These painted surfaces made even simple jars into works of art, turning household tasks into encounters with legend. The images also served as storytelling tools, reminding people of shared myths and cultural ideals. Pottery was portable, so these stories traveled with trade, spreading Greek imagery far beyond its borders. Each piece was both practical and poetic, reflecting the Greek belief that beauty should infuse daily life. To hold a cup or jar was to hold not only clay, but also the imagination of artists who filled the world with scenes of wonder and memory. Black figure and red figure styles are still admired today. Greek pottery developed two distinctive artistic styles that remain admired: black figure and red figure painting. In the black figure technique, artists painted figures in dark silhouettes against the natural red of the clay, then etched fine details into the surface. Later, the red figure style reversed this, leaving figures in the natural red of the clay while painting the background black, allowing for greater detail and realism. Both methods produced stunning images that captured myth, sport, and daily life with elegance. These styles spread widely through trade, making Greek vases prized across the Mediterranean. Today, museums around the world display these works, and visitors still marvel at their craftsmanship. What once held wine or oil now holds stories, preserved across centuries. The endurance of these styles reminds us how deeply the Greeks valued both function and beauty, blending them seamlessly into objects that were as useful as they were timeless. Some vases were signed by famous artists. In a time when many works of art were anonymous, some Greek vase painters proudly signed their creations. Names like Exekias and Euphronios survive today, attached to masterpieces that show extraordinary skill. Signing a vase turned it from an everyday object into an expression of identity, declaring the artist's presence across time. These signatures suggest that the Greeks recognized individual genius, not just collective tradition. Buyers valued such works highly, and many were exported far beyond Greece. A signed vase might depict scenes of epic battles or quiet domestic life, each line carefully crafted by hands eager to be remembered. Through these signatures, we glimpse the personalities behind the art, real people who sought not only to decorate clay, but also to leave their mark upon the world. To see their names today is to feel a human connection across 2.5 millennia. Pottery was used in everyday life, not just decoration. Though museums display Greek vases as art, in their time they were practical tools of daily living. Large amphorae stored wine and oil. Small cups and bowls held meals. Craters mixed wine and water at banquets, while hydria carried water from wells. These vessels were handled constantly, woven into the rhythm of ordinary tasks. Yet their painted surfaces ensured that even the most routine moments carried beauty. A family pouring wine might gaze upon painted gods, or a servant fetching water might hold a vessel adorned with heroic deeds. This blending of art and utility reflected the Greek belief that beauty should not be confined to temples or statues, but should permeate life itself. In using these vessels, people touched stories every day, reminding themselves that myth and reality were never far apart, that even the simplest act could connect them to the grandeur of their culture. Women in Athens could not vote or own property. In the grand democracy of Athens, where citizens gathered to debate and decide laws, women had no political voice. They could not vote, hold office, or even attend the assembly. Their legal rights were limited as well. Property was controlled by their male relatives, whether fathers, husbands, or sons. Women's lives were expected to center on the home, raising children and managing household duties. Yet this restriction was not universal across Greece. In Sparta, for example, women had more autonomy. In Athens, however, the paradox was striking. A society celebrated for inventing democracy extended its freedoms only to men. For women, citizenship existed in name but not in power. Still, within the household and in religious roles, Athenian women carried responsibilities vital to the community, even if the public stage denied them recognition. Their unseen labor sustained the very city that excluded them from its most celebrated institutions. But priestesses could hold enormous religious power. Though political life was barred to them, women in Greece could wield influence through religion. Priestesses often presided over the worship of powerful goddesses like Athena, Demeter, and Artemis. These roles came with prestige, authority, and sometimes wealth. At Eleusis, priestesses led the sacred mysteries of Demeter, rituals so secret that even today their details remain hidden. In Delphi, the Pythia, the oracle of Apollo, was the most famous religious figure in the Greek world, consulted by kings and city-states alike. Through their words, wars were launched, colonies founded, and lives reshaped. These women spoke with the authority of the divine, commanding respect in ways no politician could. While excluded from democracy, priestesses embodied a different kind of power, one rooted in mystery, faith, and the voice of the gods themselves. Their presence revealed that even in a male-dominated society, spiritual authority could belong to women. The Greeks believed certain women could channel the gods. Beyond formal priesthoods, the Greeks believed some women were touched directly by divine power. These women served as oracles or seers, capable of entering trances and speaking the will of the gods. The most famous was the Pythia at Delphi, who inhaled sacred vapors in Apollo's temple before giving cryptic prophecies. Others, scattered across Greece, acted as mediums or interpreters of omens. To the Greeks, these women embodied the mysterious boundary between mortal and divine. Their words, though often obscure, carried immense weight, shaping politics, war, and personal decisions. People traveled great distances to hear their counsel, offering gifts in exchange for guidance. Whether truly inspired or not, these women commanded awe. They represented the belief that the gods spoke most clearly through human vessels, and that destiny itself could be glimpsed in the trembling voice of a woman touched by powers beyond comprehension. Weddings were arranged, and brides were very young. Marriage in ancient Greece was less a romantic union than a family arrangement. Fathers chose husbands for their daughters, often to strengthen alliances or secure property. Girls married young, sometimes in their early teens, while grooms were usually older, already established in life. Weddings were elaborate, filled with ritual. The bride was bathed in sacred water, adorned with a veil and jewelry, and escorted in a torchlit procession to her husband's home. There she stepped over the threshold, symbolizing her transition into a new household. Songs and sacrifices marked the occasion, blending joy with solemnity. While modern eyes may see these practices as restrictive, to the Greeks, marriage was a vital social bond, linking families and ensuring continuity. For the young bride, it was often her first step into adult life, a moment shaped as much by tradition as by personal choice. Marriage ceremonies were filled with sacred rituals. A Greek wedding was a deeply symbolic affair, layered with ritual acts meant to protect and bless the couple. Beforehand, sacrifices were made to gods like Hera, protector of marriage, and Artemis, guardian of maidens. The bride's hair was often cut or bound, marking her passage into a new role. During the ceremony, torches lit the way as songs filled the air, and the couple shared offerings of bread and wine. Friends and family celebrated, but the tone was not only festive, it was sacred. Marriage bound two households, and every gesture was a prayer for fertility, harmony, and prosperity. Even small details carried weight. The bride stepping over the hearth, the groom offering gifts, the procession circling the home. To the Greeks, a wedding was more than a contract. It was a ritual, weaving human lives into the larger fabric of divine order and tradition. Childbirth was dangerous, but considered a blessing from Hera. In ancient Greece, childbirth was both feared and celebrated. Without modern medicine, the risks were immense, and many women did not survive the ordeal. Yet the act was honored as sacred, watched over by Hera, goddess of marriage, and Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth. Women supported one another during labor, midwives using herbs, prayers, and experience to ease the process. Successful births were occasions of joy, celebrated with offerings to the gods. Children were seen as blessings, securing the family line and ensuring care for parents in old age. The peril of childbirth gave women a unique connection to life and death, placing them at the center of continuity. To survive it was to embody strength and resilience to endure loss, was to embody courage. In every home, the cries of newborns and the prayers of mothers wove together, echoing the fragility and sanctity of human existence. Greek children played with dolls, balls, and knucklebones. Childhood in Greece, though shorter than today, was filled with play. Children enjoyed dolls made of clay or wood, often with movable limbs. Balls stuffed with rags or filled with air provided endless games of catch and chase. Knucklebones, the ankle bones of animals served as toys, used much like dice or jacks. These games were more than amusement. They taught coordination, competition, and imagination. Children also played with carts, hoops, and miniature versions of adult tools. Play reflected adult life, preparing children for the roles they would one day assume. Yet it also carried joy, laughter echoing through narrow streets and courtyards. Despite the hardships of the ancient world, Greek children found delight in simple objects, reminding us that the impulse to play is timeless. Across millennia, the sound of children's games remains a universal note of human continuity. Education was reserved for boys in most cities. In most Greek city-states, education was considered the privilege of boys. They attended schools where they learned to read, write, and recite poetry. Music was equally important, as was physical training, preparing them to become citizens capable of both thought and action. Girls, by contrast, were educated at home, trained in domestic skills that would prepare them for marriage and motherhood. The division reflected the gender roles of the society. Men engaged in politics, war, and public life, while women's sphere was the household. Yet even within this system, values of knowledge and learning were held high. For the Greeks, education was not just about skills, but about shaping character, cultivating virtue, discipline, and excellence, or arete. Though limited in access, the educational ideals of Greece laid foundations that still echo in how we think about the purpose of learning today. Girls learned household skills from their mothers. While boys went to schools, girls' education came from their mothers and other women in the household. From a young age, they were taught to weave, spin, cook, and manage domestic tasks. They learned how to run a home, care for children, and uphold traditions. This training prepared them for their roles as wives and mothers, the central expectations of their society. Though confined within the walls of the household, these skills carried enormous importance. The economy of the home was the foundation of the city itself. In weaving cloth or storing food, women preserved both family and culture. Stories and songs were often passed down in this setting, giving daughters not only practical knowledge but also a sense of belonging. The quiet education of girls was less visible than that of boys, but it sustained Greek life from within, ensuring continuity across generations. In Athens, boys learned music, poetry, and gymnastics. Education in Athens aimed to balance mind and body. Boys studied letters, learning to read and write, but they also memorized the epics of Homer, reciting passages of the Iliad and Odyssey until they became second nature. Music was essential, as playing the lyre or singing refined discipline and appreciation of beauty. Gymnastics, practiced in open-air gymnasia, built strength, agility, and endurance, preparing boys for military service as well as civic life. The ideal Athenian education sought harmony, intellect sharpened by poetry, soul shaped by music, and body strengthened by exercise. Wealthier families extended this training with tutors in philosophy and rhetoric, grooming future leaders for the assembly. This blend of culture and fitness reflected the Greek belief in balance, the pursuit of arete, excellence in all things. To be educated in Athens was to be prepared not just for survival, but for a life of virtue and citizenship. Literacy was more widespread than once believed. For a long time, scholars imagined ancient literacy as rare, the privilege of elites. But the Greek world leaves traces of many hands. Names scratched on pottery, quick notes on wax tablets, curses etched on thin sheets of lead, prices painted on jars, voting shards, ostraka scrawled in hurried letters, all hint at everyday reading and writing. Market stalls had signs, ship manifests, listed cargo soldiers marked gear with initials and hopes. Not everyone could craft polished prose, but functional literacy, the ability to read a name, tally a figure, copy a short line, threaded through workshops, docks, and temples. In a world of spoken law and sun poetry, writing became a quiet companion to trade, ritual, and politics. Picture a potter pausing to sign a vase, a child tracing letters in dust, a voter scratching a famous name into clay, small gestures adding up to a literate hum beneath the public roar. Slavery was common in every Greek city. Walk any Greek street, and slavery is present, in kitchens, quarries, workshops, and fields. Enslaved people were prisoners of war, victims of piracy, or those born into bondage. They cooked meals, spun wool, hauled stone, rowed ships, served at symposia, and tended shops. City-states built lofty ideals of freedom and citizenship while relying on unfree labor to make daily life possible, a contradiction at the heart of the classical world. Some enslaved people lived within households, their lives entwined with a family's fortunes. Others were leased to public works, or driven hard in mines and factories. A few could earn or be granted freedom, yet most could not alter their fate. Greek art and philosophy explored justice, excellence, and the good life. The streets and workshops reminded everyone that prosperity could rest on unseen backs. It's a hard truth. The brilliance of Greece and the burden of slavery coexisted. Some slaves were educated and served as teachers. Not all enslaved labor was rough. In many households, a trusted, educated slave served as pedagogos, escort, tutor, moral chaperone. He walked boys to school, supervised lessons, corrected posture and tone, and sometimes taught letters, music, or arithmetic himself. Other enslaved specialists kept accounts, copied documents, and worked as scribes in shops or public offices. Talent could be cultivated because skill increased value. A clever teacher or accountant brought prestige and profit to a household. The arrangement is paradoxical. Wisdom flowing from an unfree person to the child of a citizen. In plays and dialogues, this figure hovers at the edge of scenes, quietly shaping futures. Occasionally, education offered a path to manumission. More often, it did not. Yet through these tutors and scribes, knowledge crossed boundaries that status could not erase, reminding us that the engines of learning in Greece included voices the official story seldom names. Others worked in silver mines under harsh conditions. Far from the glow of temples, deep in the Laurian hills, the wealth of Athens was hacked from the earth. Narrow shafts and low tunnels forced miners, many of them enslaved, to crawl in darkness, breathing dust and stale air. The rock was crushed, washed in settling tanks, and smelted into silver that paid rowers, built ships, and gilded festivals. Accidents were common. Fumes and heavy labor wore bodies thin. Children, small and nimble, sometimes squeezed where adults could not. The city's bright democracy, its theaters and marble, its sudden naval power, all drew strength from these grim corridors. To follow a gleaming coin back to its source is to pass through smoke and echoing stone, to hear picks ring on ore, to glimpse the human cost of a golden age. Athens shone beneath it. Unseen hands kept the lamps burning. Greek religion had no holy book, only ritual and story. There was no single scripture to bind the Greeks. Belief lived in practices, in sacrifices, libations, hymns, processions, and in stories retold, epics at festivals, hymns to the gods, local legends woven into place. The same god could differ from city to city. Athena as warrior, weaver, guardian Apollo as healer, archer, oracle. Orthodoxy mattered less than orthopraxy, doing the rites correctly, honoring the right powers at the right times. Myths explained, entertained, warned rituals bound neighbor to neighbor and city to patron deity. Priests tended altars, but philosophers argued, poets embroidered, sculptors revealed divinity in marble and gold. The faith of Greece was not a book on a shelf. It was a calendar on the wall, a fire on the altar, a chorus in the theater, a story on every tongue, a living tapestry constantly rewoven. Sacrifices of animals were central to worship. At the heart of a festival stood the Thysia. Animals crowned with garlands led to the altar amid music and prayer. Barley was scattered, a lock of hair cut, the throat swiftly opened. Smoke rose as thigh bones wrapped in fat burned for the gods, while the rest of the meat was roasted, shared, and eaten. Sacrifice bound heaven and city in a single meal, gods honored with scent and flame, people united by shared flesh and feast. It was solemn and it was social. Justice cases paused, politics softened, strangers welcomed. The ritual said, "We remember we're mortal, we remember who protects us, and we remember each other." In that mingling of ash, prayer, and savory air, Greek religion became tangible, not a distant doctrine, but a table laid in the open, where worship tasted like salt, smoke, and celebration. Festivals filled the calendar, honoring different gods. The Greek year pulsed with festivals, spring sowing and autumn harvest, city birthdays and temple anniversaries. Each feast had its rhythms, processions with laurel and song games of speed, strength, and art, sacrifices at dawn, dances at dusk. Demeter's rites promised renewal. Dionysus brought theater and ecstatic joy. Apollo's cleansed and healed. Artemis guarded thresholds and youth. Markets bloomed around sanctuaries, Treaties were announced, exiles recalled, and grievances set aside, at least for a day. Festivals stitched time together, making a city feel like a single breathing body. Children learned traditions by walking them. Elders judged contests and told old victories again. Between storm and calm, war and peace, the festival calendar held a steady rhythm, reminding everyone that the gods watched over planting and poetry alike, and that the good life required both work and wonder. The Panathenea festival celebrated Athens' patron goddess. Every year, and especially every fourth year, Athens honored Athena with the Panathenea, a city-sized heartbeat of devotion. A great procession climbed the Acropolis. Citizens, metics, magistrates, priests, musicians, and girls who had woven a new robe, the peplus, for the goddess. The garment, rich with woven myths, was presented at her ancient wooden image. Athletic, musical, and poetic contests followed. Boat races cut bright wakes across the bay. Prizes of precious olive oil filled tall, handsome amphorae stamped with the city's pride. The Parthenon's long frieze seems to echo this movement. Horses, citizens, and offerings in carved procession, a stone memory of civic unity. The Panathenea was worship and self-portrait, thanksgiving and display. Athens telling Athena who she was, and telling itself who it hoped to be, wise, strong, orderly, and radiant, beneath the goddess's clear-eyed gaze. Herds of animals were sacrificed on the Acropolis. On festival days, the Acropolis became a landscape of smoke and song. Hecatombs, offerings of 100 cattle, moved like living rivers through the gates, hooves striking stone. Trumpets sounded, prayers rose, knives flashed, and altars hissed with fat and flame. The gods received their fragrant portion. The people received meat enough to feed a city. Distribution was orderly, citizens by tribe, guests and allies honored, the poor not forgotten. For a moment, the divisions of daily life softened in shared ritual and shared meal. The spectacle was immense, not hidden in a temple's dim hall, but performed under open sky, with marble shining and banners stirring. The city gave richly, and in giving, declared itself blessed. To stand there was to feel power braided with piety, a people claiming their place beneath their gods, bound together by smoke, salt, and gratitude. Torchlight races were run through the streets at night. When evening came, fire itself became a competitor. In Lampedodromia, torch races, teams ran relay style through city streets or from sanctuary to sanctuary, passing the flame without letting it die. The goal wasn't only speed, but custody of sacred fire. Arrive first with the torch still burning. Some races honored Hephaestus or Prometheus, keepers and givers of fire. Others sanctified local rites. Imagine the hush before the start, the sudden shout, the flare of pitch-lit torches, feet drumming stone, crowds pressing in alleys, a quick handoff at the change, spark leaping, breath bursting, the city flickering with orange. Light. In a world where fire meant warmth, craft, and life, these races were more than sport. They were vows kept in motion. The victor's prize was symbolic as much as material, proof that human skill could carry sacred light safely through the night. The Greeks believed heroes could become gods after death. For the Greeks, death was not always an ending. Exceptional mortals, warriors, founders, athletes, could transcend ordinary fate, becoming heroes. Through worship and offerings, their spirits gained power, sometimes even divine status. Heracles, for example, was said to ascend to Olympus, living among the gods after his labors. Local heroes often protected their cities, appearing in dreams, sending blessings, or warding off enemies. Shrines, called hero urns, dotted the landscape, where people poured libations or left offerings. To the Greeks, the boundary between mortal and divine was porous. Greatness in life could echo beyond death, transforming a person into something more than human. These beliefs gave comfort and inspiration. The idea that valor, excellence, or suffering might win a kind of immortality. In honoring heroes, the Greeks honored the hope that human lives, too, might leave marks lasting enough to brush against eternity. Cults of heroes existed alongside cults of gods. Greek religion was layered. The mighty Olympians reigned above, but alongside them stood the heroes, mortal figures elevated by death and memory. Communities worshipped their founders, fallen warriors, or mythic figures like Achilles or Orestes. Hero cults often centered at tombs where sacrifices were made, not of roasted meat, but of blood poured directly into the earth, feeding the spirit below. Festivals and contests were sometimes held in their honor, binding the living to the legendary dead. These cults gave cities a sense of identity and continuity, linking present struggles to past glories. Unlike the distant gods, heroes felt closer, more human, their triumphs and flaws still recognizable. They offered protection, guidance, and pride, standing as reminders that mortals could matter as deeply as immortals. To walk in Greece was to pass not only temples but also tomb shrines, where memory and worship intertwined seamlessly. Alexander the Great claimed descent from Zeus. From childhood, Alexander of Macedon was told he was no ordinary prince. His mother, Olympias, claimed he descended from Achilles, while his father Philip traced lineage to Heracles. Yet Alexander went further. He embraced the idea that Zeus himself was his true father. Stories spread of omens, thunderbolts at his birth, serpents guarding his mother. As his conquests carried him across Asia, he encouraged this divine image, accepting honors as son of Zeus Ammon in Egypt. For soldiers, the claim elevated him to near godlike status. For rivals, it justified his ambition to rule the world. Whether he believed it fully or used it shrewdly, the myth became part of his identity. Alexander walked the line between man and God, echoing Greek heroes who rose beyond mortality. His claim reveals how, in the Greek imagination, power and divinity often intertwined, shaping history as much as faith. He built cities named after himself across his empire. As Alexander's armies swept across Asia, cities rose in his wake. Dozens bore his name: Alexandria in Egypt, in Arachosia, in the distant reaches of Bactria, and many more. Each was planted as a garrison, trade hub, or administrative center, spreading Greek culture while securing his empire. The most famous, Alexandria in Egypt, became a beacon of knowledge and commerce, its lighthouse and library legendary. These cities blended Greek layouts, grids of streets, theaters, temples, with local traditions. Through them, language, art, and custom spread far beyond Greece itself. To walk their markets centuries later was to hear Greek spoken beside Persian, Egyptian, or Indian tongues. Alexander stamped not only his name but his culture onto the world. These cities were living monuments, reminders of both his ambition and the enduring reach of Hellenism, stretching like a chain of sparks across continents. Greek culture spread as far as India through his conquests. When Alexander crossed into India, the Greek world expanded farther than ever before. Soldiers, settlers, and scholars carried their traditions eastward, leaving traces in distant lands. Greek coins have been found in Indian soil, their inscriptions mingling with local scripts. Art from the region of Gandhara shows striking blends. Buddhist figures carved with drapery and poses borrowed from Greek sculpture. Philosophy, astronomy, and medicine crossed cultural lines, enriching both traditions. To the Greeks who ventured east, India was a land of marvels, exotic animals, endless rivers, and wise sages. To locals, Greeks were curious newcomers, their gods and customs strange yet intriguing. Though Alexander's empire fractured soon after his death, these encounters left lasting imprints. The meeting of Greek and Indian thought was one of history's great cultural crossroads, proof that conquest, however violent, also carried seeds of exchange and transformation. After Alexander, Greek and Eastern cultures blended. With Alexander gone, his generals carved the empire into kingdoms. Yet the mixing of cultures he set in motion did not stop. Greek settlers married locals, Greek cities thrived in foreign lands, and Greek gods mingled with Eastern deities. In temples, Zeus might be worshipped alongside Egyptian gods in art. Greek forms framed Persian or Indian themes. This fusion created hybrid traditions, architecture with Greek columns and Eastern ornament, rulers who styled themselves in both Greek and local fashions. It was not one culture replacing another, but a blending, a dialogue of forms and ideas. This era showed that identity could be layered, that worlds once separate could find new expressions together. From marketplaces to palaces, the air carried languages and customs intertwined, creating something neither purely Greek nor purely foreign, but a rich tapestry that stretched across continents. This fusion era is called the Hellenistic Age. Historians call the centuries after Alexander's death the Hellenistic Age, a time when Greek culture radiated outward, interweaving with the traditions of Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Great cities like Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria became melting pots of language, art, science, and religion. Greek remained the cultural backbone, but it blended seamlessly with local elements, creating new schools of philosophy, new styles of art, and new ways of worship. This age saw advances in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, as well as vibrant artistic achievements, from lifelike sculpture to sprawling libraries. It was a time of cosmopolitan exchange, when the legacy of classical Greece was carried into new realms and given fresh life. The Hellenistic Age reminds us that culture is never static. It thrives on movement, mixture, and the bold curiosity of people reaching beyond their horizons. Greek language became the lingua franca of the ancient world. One of Alexander's most lasting legacies was linguistic. Greek, once confined to the Aegean, spread across his empire, becoming the common language of trade, diplomacy, and scholarship. Merchants in Egypt, philosophers in Syria, and doctors in Anatolia all communicated in Greek. This shared tongue allowed ideas to leap across borders. Astronomy from Babylon, medicine from Egypt, philosophy from Athens, all exchanged and translated through Greek. Even centuries later, under Roman rule, Greek remained the language of learning. The New Testament of Christianity was written in Greek, ensuring its spread across the Mediterranean. For the Greeks, language was more than communication. It was identity, memory, and power. By becoming a lingua franca, Greek tied together lands once divided, creating a world where knowledge could travel swiftly, carried not by armies but by words etched in scrolls, spoken in markets, and whispered in diar. Classrooms. The Library of Alexandria collected Greek knowledge on a massive scale. In Alexandria, Egypt, one of the most ambitious projects of the ancient world took shape: the Great Library. Its goal was nothing less than to gather all human knowledge. Ships arriving in the harbor were searched, any scrolls found were copied, with originals kept for the library. Scholars worked within its walls, translating texts, compiling histories, and studying medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. At its height, it may have contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the wisdom of Greece and the wider world preserved together. Though its eventual destruction is shrouded in legend, the dream of the library remains powerful. A vision of knowledge as something to be cherished, gathered, and shared. In Alexandria's halls, Greek curiosity met global learning, weaving traditions into a vast tapestry of thought. The library became a symbol of what Greece at its best represented, a love of wisdom without end. Even today, Greek ideas shape science, politics, and art. The journey of ancient Greece did not end with its ruins. Its ideas ripple forward: democracy and debate in politics, logic and philosophy in schools, geometry, medicine, and astronomy in science, drama, sculpture, and architecture in art. Words we use daily: theatre, music, history, cosmos, politics, are Greek gifts. The Olympic Games, reborn in modern times, still echo ancient contests. Even myths of Zeus, Athena, and Heracles live on in stories, films, and symbols. Greece's legacy lies not only in monuments, but in habits of thought, questioning, reasoning, balancing beauty with truth. To engage with these ideas is to converse with voices across millennia, to feel the presence of a civilization that dreamed boldly and left its mark on nearly every corner of human culture. Even as centuries pass, Greece whispers to us still, a reminder that wonder and wisdom are timeless companions. And now, dear listener, we have reached the end of our long wander through the world of ancient Greece. Together we have walked its sunlit streets and shadowed temples, tracing the lives of gods and heroes, poets and philosophers, soldiers and children. We have stood in the glow of firelit festivals, drifted across seas in swift triremes, and paused in the hush of libraries, where scrolls whispered with knowledge. We have peered into the glittering brilliance of Athens, felt the austere strength of Sparta, and followed the ambitions of Alexander as he carried Greek culture across continents. And yet, even after 100 stories, Greece remains larger than our telling. It is a land of echoes and ruins, of myths that still stir our imaginations, and of ideas that continue to shape the world we live in. The marble may have crumbled, but the vision endures: freedom and inquiry, art and beauty, the eternal search for meaning. As you rest now, let these voices of the past settle into silence. Picture the soft lapping of waves against a Greek shore, moonlight falling on ancient stone. Imagine a festival procession winding slowly up the Acropolis, torches flickering, psalms drifting into the night air. Or perhaps see a lone philosopher in the quiet of the starlit courtyard, speaking softly to a circle of eager students. These images belong not only to history, but to the timeless dreamscape where memory and imagination meet. You have traveled far tonight, across centuries and seas, carried by the stories of a people who sought wisdom, beauty, and greatness. Their world was not perfect, but it was endlessly curious, and it is that curiosity that binds us still, whispering through time. So close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let the weight of the day slip gently away. Allow the ancient voices to fade into the background until all that remains is calm and quiet, the slow rhythm of your own breath, steady as an oar on calm water. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the wonders of ancient Greece. If you enjoyed tonight's voyage and happen to still be awake, you are warmly invited to subscribe and follow along for the next video, where more stories of history await. But for now, let the past dissolve into dream. Drift gently, rest deeply, and know that you carry with you the echoes of a civilization that once gazed at the same stars and wondered, as you do now, about the mysteries of the world. Good night.